Rihanna Allison came from a noble family with a mixture of Arundel and Kraton blood, but Queen Rihanna Allison was only lip service because her father betrayed her mother and her half-sister was jealous of Rihanna, and even her husband, whom she loved dearly, didn't notice her love. So when the queen lost the baby, she lost her last hope and drank the poison her half-sister gave her. And the last phrase the girl said before she died was that if she could live another life, she wouldn't love so much. It was night outside, and at that time, the main character opened her eyes and looking around found that she was now in her children's room. Then she began to look around her body and realized that her hands had shrunk as if she had become a child. So she began to search her surroundings for any clues and saw the mourning dress that Rihanna Allison wore to her mother's funeral when she was 12 years old. And then Rihanna Allison reflected on the fact that she only wore mourning attire once. And I thought maybe it was just a dream. Then I realized in shock that it couldn't have happened because she definitely drank the poison and died. And all she remembers is the pain she felt when she died. And she thought it was probably just an illusion she saw while she was floating down the river to the afterlife. After which she ran to the mirror and looking around herself couldn't understand how it happened and why she looked glorious she was 12 years old again. After which she looked around the doors that were in the front and realized that if she was now really 12 and back in time, there must be a knocking sound. And so it was. A maid came up who knocked gently and called to the mistress and then entered. And getting closer to Rihanna, she wondered why the girl was still awake and worried that she was having trouble sleeping, but then worriedly thought that maybe it was because of her mother's death, and asked Rihanna Allison not to be so sad or she might get sick. And then all Rihanna Allison did was cry as she looked at her maid Maria and wondered if she'd really gone back in time. Maria was the maid who had cared for Rihanna since she was a baby, and every morning the girl helped with waking up and never missed a day, until she was kicked out of the door for falsely accusing Rihanna's half-sister Leticia of stealing jewelry. And then Rihanna Allison approached Maria and gave her a big hug and confessed that she missed her so much. But Maria, though surprised, responded to the embrace and stated that the mistress must have had a bad dream. After that, Rihanna Allison calmed down and said that she should not worry because she still had her faithful maid and her father, and everything would be fine. Because her father's gonna bring in the very child who's gonna take everything away from her. But in the end, Maria said that Count Allison would be coming to see her soon, and so they had to get ready. And although Maria didn't know exactly when Count Allison had left after the funeral, he would definitely be there today. And then said they should wash the girl's face and then start getting dressed. But at that moment, with a serious look at Maria, Rihanna Allison asked that the girl find her a lawyer. But a surprised Maria asked if Rihanna Allison was talking about Mr. Ned, then asked why Rihanna suddenly needed Ned. But a flustered Rihanna Allison said she didn't have time to explain everything and had to check something before her father returned. And then looking around Rihanna Allison, all that Maria thought about was that it was unlikely to get a meeting with Ned right now and didn't understand this kind of decision by mistress. But looking into her, she had a look of determination in her face, realized that she would follow orders and asked to wait a bit. Ending up alone, and Rihanna reflected on the fact that yesterday was her mother's funeral according to current time. And Rihanna Allison was sure that soon her father Earl Allison would bring his illegitimate child. And then all her troubles would begin as they had before. But now Rihanna Allison has gone back in time. And maybe it was the blessing of a god who took pity on her life, and Rihanna Allison realized that this was her chance that she would definitely take. So after changing and leaving the room, Rihanna Allison realized that she had had enough of all this suffering, and this time she would never suffer like in her past. Count Allison was a poor aristocrat from a lower-class background, but that all changed when he met Rihanna's mother, who came from the Kraton V family. Eventually, the imperial family promised the title of Count and untold riches if the father of the protagonist would marry this girl, but he did not love her. In the end, after giving birth, the woman got an incurable disease, but the Count didn't care as he already had a mistress. As a result, the day after his wife's funeral, Count Allison continued to commit immoral acts and brought an illegitimate child into the house, as if she had only been waiting for this moment. At this time, the Count smilingly told Leticia that he was very glad that they could finally live together. And the girl declared that now she would live with her father as if it were in a fairy tale. And then, hugging Leticia, he pitied his daughter, realizing that if it hadn't been for that woman, they wouldn't have had to live apart, and he would have been able to take Leticia and her mother away much sooner. But Leticia hugs her father, explained that her mother always said that the Count had not abandoned them, and that he would surely take them back to his place, and so she believed it to the last. And the Count with a smile said that he loved his daughter madly, and although he had another child, but he loved only Leticia. And Leticia said with a grateful smile that the most important thing for her was that they were together, and she thought that she had waited a long time for this day, and recalled that she had previously lived with other children and often fought with them over toys and other things. And the teachers who were displeased with her behavior constantly scolded Leticia for taking other people's things. And even if she really wanted to, she couldn't do such a thing. And then Count Allison told Leticia that she should have waited a little longer, all now his wife was seriously ill, and as soon as she died, he would be able to take the girl home. And at that moment she, thinking of the fact that if the Countess left this world, she would go away with Papa, realized only one thing, that she wants this woman dead as soon as possible. Eventually they'd arrived, and then while Leticia was looking at the people lined up and greeting their hearing, Count Allison announced that this was now Leticia's new home. At last, a butler came up to the Count and inquired in surprise who the girl he had brought with him was. And then he proudly announced that it was his daughter and they had not been able to live in a place before. But that's when Rihanna showed up and gave her father and her half-sister a stern look. But the Count smilingly asked Rihanna to come down to them, and it informed Leticia that he wanted to introduce her to his older sister. But their happy Rihanna Allison only ordered Leticia to leave her house and never come here again, and informed her father that he had to leave with his daughter. In fact, a few hours ago, in the living room of the mansion, Rihanna Allison was waiting for a lawyer to approach her, and then he bowed and said that he had come at her request. And Rihanna Allison smilingly asked him to sit down to discuss important business. And then the man, sipping his tea, reflected that Rihanna Allison had always been a very quiet child and did not understand why she'd called her so suddenly. But Rihanna Allison was determined to see her mother's prenuptial agreement and her inheritance. And then, shocked by such a statement, the lawyer did not know how to drive himself. But Rihanna Allison continued and explained that she now wants Ned to probate her estate and appoint a new guardian for her, and said that if Ned refused to do what she asked, she would charge her father and the lawyer with non-payment of the tax. And a shocked Ned literally couldn't believe that something like that was now being said to him by a 12-year-old girl. But she calmly informed that everyone would be surprised if she accused her father. But when her godmother, the Queen, would find out about it, the investigation would be very thorough, and asked if Ned knew that you could go to jail for not paying taxes and cheating on the royal family. Finally, at this moment, the butler, looking fearfully at Rihanna, inquired if the lady understood what she had said to the Count. And a disgruntled Count Allison ordered Rihanna not to behave in such a manner and to come down to them immediately. But Rihanna Allison pulled out a package and revealed that she and her lawyer had just finalized all the necessary procedures, and as of this moment, she was the sole owner of this house, and screamed that she was Rihanna Allison, who got this estate from her mother by birthright. But a disgruntled Earl Allison yelled at Rihanna, saying she was crazy and had no right. But Rihanna Allison didn't even pay attention to the shouts, and turning to the butler, ordered him to come over to her now and check her papers and let the Count see it. And then he obeyed the order and read out the stipulation that if the marriage between the Count and Anastasia should be dissolved, all their property was to be placed at the public disposal, and Anastasia's children can be the sole heirs. So her own daughter, Rihanna Allison, gets the title and all the property, and the deed is recognized as valid by Ned's lawyer. And then Joffrey declared to the Earl that Rihanna Allison was the rightful owner of the estate. But Count Allison literally couldn't believe his ears and went over and tore up the document in front of everyone and threw it away and said that it didn't matter what Rihanna's rights were because she couldn't use the house until she was of age, and she should listen to her father because parents decide whether their children live or die. But Rihanna Allison reported that Earl Allison didn't even bother to read the contract all the way through. This marriage was between Arundel's and Kraton's men. In such a case, the child can choose its own guardian. So she chose her uncle and said that the Earl could no longer tell her how to live her life. But Earl Allison swung around unhappily to hit Rihanna, only unhappily to wonder how she could ever give his property to someone from the Kraton family. But Rihanna Allison only grudgingly repeated for the last time that the Count had absolutely no rights in this house. And now he even had to take his child and get out of here as soon as possible. But when Count Allison swung to hit Rihanna, Maria stepped in to defend her and took the blow. And then she lost consciousness from the force of the blow. But at that moment, Joffrey stood up for them, wondering how Earl Allison could ever behave in such a manner. But he only grudgingly declared that if the butler interfered in their dispute, he would also be beaten. But the butler, shrouding himself behind the lady, as well as her maid, declared that honest men should suppress violence and such behavior, so he would not allow him to do so. But the disgruntled Earl Allison merely informed him that Geoffrey could not afford such behavior, and ordered the other servants to interfere and remove the butler. But none of them even moved. But at that moment, Rihanna Allison spoke, and so everyone immediately began to listen to what she had to say to them. And then the girl resolutely declared that she commanded, as the new mistress, that they should respectfully remove the Earl and his child from her estate. And eventually, everyone listened to her and grabbed the Count and started to take him out. But an excited Leticia addressed Rihanna as a sister, which the girl was very unhappy about, and Rihanna stated that she was never a sister to Leticia. And then she remembered that in a previous life, Leticia had shackled her and said she would take her place. But at that moment, she saw Leticia begging her not to kick her out because they had the same father and were related. And Rihanna calmly informed her that the dress Leticia was wearing was made by her mom when she was still alive. And then excitedly, the girl said she didn't know about it because her father had given it to her. And then Rihanna calmly informed her that it would be the only thing Leticia could get from her, and they could live together like they wanted to. Then it ordered them out of her house and slammed the doors behind them. Ended up a little later in the living room, excitedly Rihanna was tending to Maria's wounds, asking why she'd put herself in harm's way, because it was stupid. But Maria said with a smile that the girl was still young, and no child should be punished like that by its parents. And if she had been struck by Count Allison, she would have been in great pain, and it better hurt her, and convinced Rihanna that anyone would do the same thing in her place. But at that moment, Rihanna Allison gave Maria a serious look and asked if she wanted to go with her to Kraton, and explained that she needed to leave as soon as possible. But she knew that Maria was born in Arundel, and she was an orphan who worked as Anastasia's maid, because the Countess saw talent in her. And later, Maria began to serve Rihanna, and so it was with all understanding that Maria could stay in that place. And if she wanted to go to a particular house, she could write her a letter of recommendation. But Maria wondered why Rihanna Allison would say something like that, since she always wanted to stay near Rihanna, and she had no family, so she wanted to serve the girl, and she'd go with her wherever Rihanna Allison wanted to go. But wondered if Rihanna had to warn the queen before arriving, because the queen loved her very much and would be upset if Rihanna Allison left without saying goodbye. So it should be said that they were leaving. And upon thinking about it, Rihanna Allison recognized she was right. And I wondered if Queen Heria Seska fought on the battlefield as an army commander during the Civil War, and she put down a rebellion of aristocrats, and it was a queen with really incredible power, and son by the very woman Rihanna Allison once loved madly. And in the past, this woman has become like a mother to her. Since ancient times, the aristocracy has wielded great power in Arundel, and after the king's death, opposed the coronation of the queen because she was a woman. And they crowned her cousin, which started a civil war, and Heria gave the throne to cousin on the condition that her son would inherit the throne. And so it seemed that the war was already over. But soon the cousin died, and the boy was given the throne. So began the regency of Heria and the sweep of the nobility. Heria crushed the opposition, adopted several reforms, and became the strongest ruler of the country. And the only person the queen cared for besides her son was her goddaughter Rihanna Allison. After which she remembered the first time she had appeared before the queen. And then she came with her mother and bowed to greet Queen Heria and introduced herself. And the queen seemed really pleased to see her. At that moment, the main character's mother also responded, saying that she hadn't seen the queen for a long time and apologized for not visiting. But Heria said with a smile that nothing was more important than Anastasia's health, and thanked that the countess had brought her daughter with her as well, and offered to sit down and have a nice chat. After which she turned to Rihanna and said that she had taken a special cookie for her, which she should like, because of which the main character was very grateful and thanked the queen. And then looking over the girl, Heria reflected that she really was insanely cute, just like her friend Anastasia. Ended up playing in the garden and chasing butterflies while Anastasia and Heria drank tea. And so one day while she was running, she came across a bird that couldn't fly because its legs were tangled in a vine. And so she was worried about how to save it. But a boy's voice came out, informing her that Rihanna should just keep that bird. But she wondered who he was, which the boy clearly wasn't happy about because she didn't understand how Rihanna Allison could not know him. But finally, without arguing, Rihanna excitedly asked the boy to help her and free the bird. But he only calmly pointed at the cat, who was already climbing the tree, explained to Rihanna that the bird would die anyway. as it would be eaten, and that was its fate. And then she started crying, and the agitated boy asked her to stop because he didn't want to be blamed for Rihanna's tantrums. But she wouldn't stop, and then the frantically frightened boy announced that he had already realized what Rihanna wanted, so he would save that bird. And eventually he did. And at the last moment, he pushed off the tree trunk and managed to untangle the bird, saving it from the attack. But in the end, and the branch broke, and so the boy fell down, but the bird was saved. And when it flew away, all that bird left behind was a golden feather that fell on the protagonist's head. And she admired such a picture. But they satisfied the boy only stated that he literally risked his life to save the bird. And Rihanna Allison didn't even look at him. But Rihanna Allison only enthusiastically approached to inquire if the lad realized that this bird was an Atraxa. Atraxa was her name in this kingdom, but in Kraton they called her Maester. And they say they're half-gods and can live in the human world in heaven. And they did not differ from ordinary birds in the world of people. But in the sky, their wings became big and shining, and the legend said that whoever catches the first of these birds will be able to fulfill one of his wishes. And then Rihanna Allison said that she was sure of what she saw, because the bird suddenly enlarged and began to shine brightly and flew off into the sky. But it seems that the guy just decided to play along with the main character by saying that she had seen a miracle, but he didn't believe it until the end. But then asked if Rihanna Allison didn't care if he was all right after the fall. And then the girl, shamed by such remarks, asked if he was all right. But I realized that it was too late for such questions. So I gave the feather to the boy and asked him to take it, because this feather could fulfill any of his wishes, because it was he who saved the bird, and so he could make a wish. And then the boy began to look at this feather and wondered if it really could fulfill his wish. And then Rihanna Allison said that if the boy will hold in front of him and from the bottom of his heart to ask, the gods will definitely fulfill his wishes. The boy ended up just handing the feather back to Rihanna and saying that she could have taken it, and saying that if Rihanna Allison hadn't intervened, he wouldn't have even thought of saving that bird. And so this feather had to be hers, and it was his gift to her. And then Rihanna Allison, who was similarly displaced, thanked the boy happily. And he looked at Rihanna Allison with embarrassment and wondered who she was. But at that moment, Anastasia came up and looked at her daughter and the boy and wondered what they were doing here. But at that moment, Heria intervened and said with a smile that she had wanted to introduce them for a long time, and it had turned out to be really wonderful. Then introduced Rihanna Allison and said she was the daughter of Countess Anastasia, and also said that the boy before the days was a prince and his name was Igor. And then Anastasia bowed to greet the young gentleman and apologized that her daughter might have brought him trouble, but he calmly informed her that everything was fine. And then Heria looked at Igor and wondered what had happened to his clothes at all. And the boy, realizing that Rihanna might be scolded, calmly said that he was just lying on the ground in the garden out of boredom, and bowed and said he had to leave, and eventually he did. When Igor was 5 years old, he stood before all the aristocrats. But his mother leaned over and informed the boy that this throne had originally belonged to her, and so Igor was to obey her and do as she said. But he only nodded in agreement, realizing that he had no other choice. And then Heria said with a smile that Igor should act sensibly, and she'd done everything for him. Eventually, when Igor turned 12, the boy became very ill, and a worried Heria told the doctor that Igor had had a fever for 4 days and had not gone down, and asked if there was any medicine, but the doctor said that he thought that the fever would go away today, because he had already given the medicine and all we had to do was wait. And then Heria looked at Igor excitedly, asking him to come to his senses soon, for this was only the beginning of his journey, and he could not leave now. But 2 days later, Igor was better, and the doctor said that his fever had begun to disappear, and so the boy would soon recover, but now he needed to rest. But suddenly at night, while everyone else who was watching him fell asleep, Igor woke up and decided to check on his mom, so he got down from the bed and quietly went out unnoticed. And then he overheard a conversation, and Heria said that she had to marry Igor as soon as possible. But the excited Marquis, as well as the queen's intimates, did not understand such urgency, for Igor was still young, and the queen might not think of marriage. Heria calmly informed that it could happen that Igor would suddenly die, and she did not know what to do with the throne in such a case. But the Marquis calmly remarked that in that case, the throne would pass to the king's son. And Heria remarked that that was why they needed Igor to have children. And Heria explained that the aristocrats were hostile to her and Igor, so she had to prepare in advance for the possibility that her son might be wrong, because otherwise they would lose the power they had fought for so long. And then Igor, excitedly listening, did not understand what they were preparing for and what mistake he might make and who would take away his power. But afterward, he remembered his mother's words that power originally belonged to her, so Igor had to listen to her. And at that moment, very painful thoughts crept into his head, and Igor realized that he was just a substitute for his mother. And in the meantime, Heria and the Marquis were pondering who was best to choose as a bride. And then the final decision was daughter Anastasia, as the girl was Heria's goddaughter. Then handing the letter to the Marquis, Heria asked that Anastasia bring her daughter, because if Rihanna, Allison, and Igor spend a lot of time together since childhood, it could easily lead to marriage. And then Igor, unable to stand the tears, ran away thinking that his mother wanted him to get married, to have children and feel like an animal. Then he ran out of the palace and found himself near the very tree where he had first met Rihanna and wept bitterly at the realization of his life. And each time she replayed in her head the words of her mother, Igor realized that he was just a puppet. And if he married the girl that Heria had chosen, he would remain a puppet. And so Igor realized that he would never, under any circumstances, love this girl. The next morning, I end up replaying in my head all the memories I have of Rihanna since they met. Igor only got angry realizing that it was all just a lie to fulfill his mother's goal. And he wondered if Rihanna Allison even knew about his mother's plans, and that she was just a tool to maintain power. As a result, 5 years later, Rihanna was already 17 years old, and then she was walking around the queen's estate. But the next moment she turned around because she felt someone stare. And at that moment, Igor managed to hide. He was also 17 and all he could do was watch Rihanna embarrassingly from the sidelines. But noticing his shift, his assistant came up to him and informed him with a smile that Rihanna Allison had indeed already become a real woman. So he understood the guy's embarrassment. After which the butler said with a smile that Igor and Rihanna Allison will soon get married, and the girl can become members of the royal family. But I saw disgruntled Igor and thought about how it seemed he wasn't allowed to say such a thing. Igor wondered why everyone around him cared so much about Rihanna Allison, because he didn't care if she joined their family or not. But eventually, when he woke up, he found Rihanna Allison in his bed next to him, lying in his arms. And so he looked her over and kissed her on the forehead and called her his favorite. And such tenderness, Rihanna woke up, and so with a smile she looked over at Igor, wishing him good morning. And then Igor woke up in a cold sweat, thinking that his dream was really terrible and not understanding what such dreams were connected with. Now Igor went to talk to Heria, who stated that they were very lucky with Igor's fiancée, for he seemed to like her as well. At that time, Igor was already 19 years old, and he reported with a smile that Heria had decided everything for him, and therefore he could not like such a girl. But the disgruntled woman cried out, wondering what her son meant by that. After all, she was only concerned about him and had picked the girl who suited him best, and asked if Rihanna Allison was a bad person and didn't understand why Igor was so resistant. But the boy extra fairly rose from his seat and declared to his mother that he had known from the beginning that she would say something like that to him, and therefore madly angry left the room, but noticed that behind the door stood Rihanna Allison, and therefore dissatisfied and asked if she heard the conversation. Then stated that he had a difficult relationship with his mother and Rihanna should know about it. Then leaned over and advised Rihanna to reconsider whether she was really fit to be queen, and left, and the girl looked back at him excitedly, not understanding why Igor was behaving like that. But the next moment she was approached by the queen, and then pretending as if nothing had happened, Rihanna bowed and greeted the queen. After which she walked into the office, and then Heria stated that Rihanna Allison was all grown up now, and if Anastasia could see her, she would be insanely proud. But then the queen is in favor of saying that Rihanna should have someone instead of a mom, someone she can trust, and who will also help her and teach her etiquette, and introduced the woman. She was Countess Abigail. And then Abigail promised that she would faithfully serve Mistress Rihanna. And the queen explained to Rihanna that she would now be living in the palace and should know the etiquette well as a future queen. Then asked if in the future Rihanna Allison would be able to give them an heir. And then she calmly agreed. But the disgruntled queen remembered that there's only a month left before the wedding, but Igor keeps pushing this marriage away like he's been very busy. But she told Rihanna that she was sure she could handle it because she would soon be Heria's daughter, and explained that if she listened to her, her life at the palace would be a good one. And then seeing her cold, calculating gaze, Rihanna Allison realized that she was just a pawn in her game and quietly bowed to her opinion. In the end, Rihanna Allison had to prepare for her marriage for this month, and Abigail was helping her and providing the history of the kingdom the royal family that Rihanna Allison had to learn, and she needed to know all the aristocrats. She was also tormented by tight clothes and corsets, because although she was slim, it was still not enough because she was not lush enough and needed to tighten the corset already. Rihanna was also constantly told how she should stand, walk, and breathe, because she would be able to become queen and had to act like it. Because the straighter her body, the clearer her thoughts. Eventually, the wedding day came, and they went to the temple where the priest pronounced Rihanna and Igor married. But just the people rejoiced wildly at such an event and praised them. As a result, a little later, the most important members of the aristocracy gathered in the royal chambers and awaited confirmation of the marriage. Whereupon the examiner declared that henceforth the marriage of the king and queen would be officially consummated. And everyone could see the truth of those words when they saw it all with their own eyes. At that moment, Igor looked at Rihanna's hair and thought that it was the same silver hair he had seen in his dream. And now this girl was his wife. He kissed her shoulder gently afterward, thinking about the fact that Rihanna Seska was now the only one he would have to live with. After that, he laid his head on her chest, and listening to her, she realized that the girl's heart was beating in time with his heart. And although Rihanna Cheska became his wife by the choice of the queen, but Igor did not understand how he could not choose her, and thought that with this girl he would share his body and soul for the rest of his life. And Igor realized that Rihanna Seska was very embarrassed because there were many eyes on them, and thought that maybe Rihanna Cheska would be on his side after all. But in the end, when he wanted to kiss her, the frightened girl turned away from him. And at that moment, Igor realized that apparently that was her answer, and she confirmed his guess. And then Igor thought about the fact that Rihanna Seska had turned him down, and she was literally a demonstration of his mother's power, and remembered her words when a woman orders him to always listen to her and be a good son. After which a disgruntled Igor reflected on the fact that this was literally a marriage of puppets, and nothing new to him. At this time, Heria, who had been watching, wondered why Igor was now delaying, for he should have taken the matter in hand. And Rihanna Seska already realized that she'd said no the first night, and despite the witnesses, Igor was definitely not going to be nice to her. And then the girl thought that if she left before the bond formed between them, she could dissolve the marriage, and then Igor could avoid unwanted marriages. Then she realized that she couldn't live with a man who didn't love her. She didn't want the kind of life her mother had, and she realized that in that case, it was much more profitable to just go live in a convent. But the next moment, Igor got angry and approached Rihanna and stated that the wife should tolerate it even if she didn't like it, and the choice was hers, because if she refused, the marriage was over. In the end, against Rihanna Cheska's will, what the queen had so much anticipated happened. And so after making sure the marriage was consummated, everyone left. And the girl was left crying wrapped in a blanket and unable to even look at Igor's face. And then, left alone, the guy tried to reach out his hand to either apologize or comfort the girl, but realized that he had literally forced himself on her the first night, and she definitely hated him. After which he informed Rihanna that it was the last day he would tolerate her tears, because now she has to be held accountable for her choices, even if it hurts. And Rihanna Seska just quietly accepted her fate. As a result, subsequent fulfillment of conjugal duty was mandatory, and if Rihanna Seska did not do so on the appointed day, the queen and the aristocrats accused her of disobedience. So the couple spent every night in anxiety and tension, but it all ended the same because Igor just did what he had to do. And every time afterward, I felt some kind of guilt, not realizing if the marriage was really supposed to look like this. Eventually, when Igor went to work in the royal library, he turned to his assistant and asked how long he had been married to his wife. And upon reflection, the man said that they had dated for 10 years before getting married 3 years ago, and reflected on the fact that they were still words like newlyweds, but wondered what reason Igor had for asking this. But he only wondered what would happen if the person he had been with for over 10 years lied to him. But then the frightened man said that such a thing could not have happened because his wife would never cheat on him, and it was really a holy man. But giving the man a paper, Igor said that it was a tax report, a list of aristocrats that haven't paid taxes in the last 10 years. And then I realized that most were related to the Queen Dowager, but there were also many people on their side. But Igor explained that he was determined to grab their opponent by the throat. But the aide warned about the Earl and said that if the Queen Dowager's power wasn't enough to control the cronies, it might anger her. But Igor only stated that they hadn't even started to do anything. But the guy was already very worried. Eventually, in the Queen Dowager's chambers, a woman explained that tax fraud was a great sin, and some of the aristocrats on the list had not paid a large sum, and it undermined the foundation of their state, so he had to take this opportunity to warn the aristocrats. But the agitated Igor spoke of Count Allison, and then the disgruntled queen inquired if even he had withheld a large sum of money, then informed her that they should not let the queen consort's family commit such crimes, and they should have sent the count to prison and stripped him of his title, as well as broken up Igor's marriage to Rihanna. And when Igor heard that, he literally couldn't believe what he was hearing, because the Queen Dowager literally wanted him to turn on Rihanna. So he wondered if the woman was trying to protect her people now, and wondered if he had previously speculated that Rihanna Seska might have been involved. But she was the queen's goddaughter and had to be under her protection, and he thought the earl's punishment would be enough. But the queen, literally reading Igor's thoughts, thought that if he thought that she would defend Rihanna, he was deeply mistaken, and said that she would never defend the girl, because you need to be able to separate personal life and responsibilities. And because of Rihanna, and people may question Igor's work, and said that the queen must be perfect and ready to sacrifice herself for the king at any moment. And at that moment, Igor realized that the girl had been a pawn from the beginning. And then a frantically disgruntled Igor thought about the fact that everyone on that list would get off with a fine, and it was really his defeat. But the assistant said that this was just the beginning of their journey, and they would not be able to achieve more. But Igor reasonably noted that the next one would be much harder, and he was sure of it. Then in looking out the window, he noticed Rihanna walking there and thought about how even the queen had dumped this girl, and didn't understand why Rihanna was the reason he failed, and tried to figure out if he could just let her go. But eventually, as if she could feel Rihanna's gaze, Seska turned toward the windows of Igor's office and looked out as if expectantly for someone there. And Igor, embarrassed by such actions, only reflected that the very presence of the girl was very embarrassing. Ended up a month later with music playing in the banquet hall and aristocrats gathered around for dinner. And unexpectedly, the Queen Dowager inquired whether Igor liked this wine, and said that she was glad to hear his approval, as this wine was selected from special Tolos grapes. And at that moment, shocked Igor thought about the fact that the Empire of Tolos was a new religious state, and Kraton and Arundel had been feuding for a long time over border disputes. And the Empire of Tolos was in the center of the mainland, and Arundel's only trade route was overland, and could always be lost as it passed through Tolos, so it was necessary to keep a close eye on the situation. So Igor always avoided conflicts with Tolos and tried to develop trade sea routes. The Queen Dowager noted that Igor was interested in maritime trade and asked if he knew about Kraton's shipbuilding, but Igor excitedly said that they should strengthen their sea lanes by active trade. But the queen calmly said that she knew what Igor was thinking, but the problem was Tolos because of this empire, but it shouldn't undermine the authority of their kingdom. And then one of the aristocrats smilingly agreed and said that they had an ally at sea, and it was Kraton, and didn't realize if they needed access to the sea. After which one of the women claimed that the queen was the heiress of the Kraton and Arundella families. And so one can think nothing of the sea as long as there is a queen, symbol of the strong union of the two countries. And then Heria said that the Tolos Empire is spreading its power at an alarming rate, so you need to know when the Tolos wine in the king's glass will become poison. And the woman said that now is not the time for trading, but for risk reduction, and wondered if the king understood her. But the boy couldn't stand it, and the Queen Dowager only mockingly asked if it was too strong. And the worried Rihanna Seska knew what she was talking about, and therefore didn't know how she could help the king. At this point, the other aristocrats mockingly reported that the young ruler's hot blood just couldn't beat this wine. And then, laughing at such a joke, the Queen Dowager said that she very much hoped that Igor would please her and direct his hot young blood to the birth of a successor. But the girl only bowed her head in shame and kept silent. And at that moment, Igor thought that wherever he looked, there was not a single person who would be on his side. Eventually, a little later, the guy was pacing his room, but Rihanna Cheska caught up with him and asked him to wait a little. And then the guy stopped waiting for some kind of explanation from the girl, and she bowed awkwardly, thanking Igor for the time he protected her father. And then Igor wondered if Rihanna Seska was now thanking him for the act he regretted the most, but just grudgingly wondered if she was done talking. And then the girl, shaking with excitement, reported that what she really wanted to report was what the queen had told her. But the disgruntled Igor only explained that he didn't even want to hear it, because now he knew perfectly well that the girl was on his mother's side, and she could say nothing more to him. Then started to turn around to leave, but Rihanna Seska grabbed her sleeve and tried to explain that it wasn't about that at all. But notwithstanding such an attitude, the guy caned the girl to the wall and asked if she had decided to sympathize with the queen at dinner, and insulted him. and now she wanted to find excuses for herself. But insanely frightened by such words, Rihanna Seska literally didn't know what to do. But Igor grudgingly reported that Rihanna was much more interested in his mother than he was in himself, and he had been able to see that today. And then said that now Rihanna would just have to watch a fool like that listen to the queen's edicts, and grabbed her arm and dragged her into the room while the girl begged him to stop. And with tears in her eyes thought that she couldn't calm him down, and she just wanted to explain everything and didn't realize where she'd made a mistake. The next moment, the king threw Rihanna on the bed, and then the girl remembered their first night together and his words that this marriage was Rihanna's choice. And then she tearfully reflected on the fact that she never chose this marriage, and from the beginning, she had no choice. Then the king remembered his mother's words that he should endeavor to produce a successor, and with those thoughts, just once again, did what the queen dowager wanted and messed with Rihanna's feelings. After that, the guy with tears in his eyes lifted the girl, wrapped her in his cape, and all Rihanna Seska thought about was the reason for such actions of her husband. But she knew she would never hear an explanation. Ended up flying over their palace and flying into the window of the room where Rihanna Seska was sleeping. So she immediately woke up in a bewildered state, not realizing whether it was a dream or reality, but then realized that the bruises on her arms were proof of what the king had done to her last night, and reflected that she didn't want to endure it again. But remembering Igor, I didn't know what had happened to him or if he had really cried. But closing her eyes, she decided that it was unlikely that such a person could cry, and it was most likely a dream. At this time in her study, the Queen Dowager was thinking that she really liked red roses because of their rich color and beautiful fragrance. But a disgruntled Igor demanded that she speak to him on business. And then the woman asked if Igor knew that because of the non-payment of taxes. The knowledge had again raised a fuss about the hairs, but the disgruntled guy stated that they did it all the time. And then the queen said it had been 3 years of their marriage and was trying to figure out if there were problems related to Rihanna. Then she added gravely that Igor needed hairs to increase his power, and he wanted them himself. But Igor calmly explained that he and Rihanna were still young and they didn't have to worry about that. But the queen only said that only Igor thought so, and she knew that Igor had not been in the queen's chambers since the last banquet, and it was wrong for a king to leave his wife whenever he wanted. Then the Queen Dowager said that she didn't like Count Allison and his wife, but if Igor wanted to protect Rihanna Seska, the heir would have to be of the same blood, and Count Allison would have to agree with her. And the disgruntled king reflected on the fact that his own mother thought he was just cattle for breeding, and the queen convinced him to accept the right offer because Rihanna Seska also wanted him to. But he grudgingly, Igor pondered that right now his mother thinks she's doing good, but soon she will be thrown out and lose everything Igor needs to prepare for that moment. But the next moment, a maid entered the room to inform the Queen Dowager and Igor that the Queen consort had arrived. Finally, when Rihanna entered, she asked Igor to dance the first dance with her sister at the next ball, because she was a debutante, and it would be hard for her to find a suitable partner. And then the Queen Dowager stated that this would be an important event for the protagonist's sister, and asked if she remembered correctly that the girl's name was Leticia. And shocked Igor literally couldn't believe that Rihanna Seska had already agreed to his mother's proposal, but asked if she had discussed it with her family. And then Rihanna Seska said that her father had agreed to it. And then the guy haggardly, smilingly informed me that if that was what everyone around him wanted, he would do what they wanted him to do. And in the end, he did, and asked Leticia to the first dance as promised. And everyone was delighted because the girl just debuted and already danced with the king, and realized that apparently Leticia liked him very much. And others posted whether it was even allowed. For now, the queen merely stood watching the scene from the sidelines. In the end, unable to endure such a spectacle, Rihanna Seska left, and it was immediately noticed by the young man, who followed her with a glance. And her half-sister Leticia only smiled slyly, already sensing her victory. The girl ended up walking around in the garden and went to the spot where she had once watched Igor rescue a bird many years ago. But at that moment, a man's voice suddenly came on to announce that he knew Rihanna liked chubby rabbits. But the best thing about rabbits is their juicy meat. And when the girl turned around, she saw that the guy was handing her a bouquet, and Rihanna Seska literally could not believe that in front of her now was Dimitri Previous. So she ran up and hugged Dimitri Previous. That's Rihanna's cousin from the royal Kraton family. And then the guy took the girl by the cheeks and asked her when she had time to grow up so much, and if she missed him, and remembered that last time the girl promised that she would not talk to him, and so he even brought her flowers. But Rihanna Seska noted that she spoke similarly because Dimitri previous drew a beard on her favorite doll. But he admitted with a smile that he thought he'd have time to wipe off his beard before Rihanna returned, and then he didn't know it would be so long before they saw each other. Then hugging the girl who was shaking and crying realized how difficult it had been for her all this time, and so wanted to comfort her. After wiping her tears, he asked her not to cry, because if anyone saw her, they'd think he brought her to tears. And then Rihanna Seska reported that he had indeed just brought the queen to tears, which was unforgivable. But Dimitri previous jokingly reported that he had made a serious diplomatic mistake and didn't know what to do. But Rihanna Seska calmly said that Dimitri should have warned her that he was coming because she would have been prepared, and she thought that something had happened. But Dimitri previous admitted that he himself did not know that he had to come so urgently, and on his way to another state, he received a message and joined the delegation. But at that moment, Igor appeared and said that it was really strange because he didn't remember a delegation from Kraton coming to them, and then asked if Dimitri previous was the queen's cousin. And then the lad, bowing to greet the king and introduce himself, said that he had come on a diplomatic mission from Kraton and was worried about his cousin the queen, so had decided to visit. But at that moment, Igor calmly informed her that an audience at such a late hour, and not even at a ball, was too secret a place to meet. And then a shocked Rihanna informed the king that he obviously misunderstood, because Mr. Dimitri previous only wanted to know how she was doing. But Dimitri previous spoke, asking the girl to shut up and call her baby girl, as he used to do in his childhood. Afterwards stated to the king that they had seen the queen often when they were younger, and now things were quite different, and they had no opportunity to arrange a meeting. Then bowed to Rihanna and apologized for being such a bad brother. But at that moment, Igor realized his despicable reception, because she knew perfectly well that Dimitri previous was really a genius of diplomacy, and he had a very famous surname. Igor then turned to the queen and told her that she should have spent more time organizing meetings, and she excitedly agreed, though she thought about how Dimitri previous had recently called her. But the next moment, Igor bent down and kissed Rihanna's hand while he thought about the fact that he couldn't control his feelings and Dimitri previous annoyed him too much. So he turned to Dimitri and told him that he would like to spend some time alone with his wife. And then Dimitri previous turned to the girl, not realizing whether he should leave her alone with Igor. But she only smiled calmly, mentally saying that everything would be fixed now. After which she left, but an excited Dimitri previous turned to the king and said that Rihanna Seska was indeed a wonderful girl, and asked that the king address her accordingly. But Igor thanked him for the guidance and informed him that Elena Rihanna Seska is his wife and also a queen, not just a girl. And such meetings and the use of such nicknames should never be repeated in the future despite their kinship, and Dimitri previous should not forget that he was here on a diplomatic visit. And then the man, realizing he could do nothing, agreed to the king's demand. Eventually, when they found themselves in the room disgruntled, Igor pondered how it was that he had been instructed by diplomats from another country and asked who was the ruler of the state if someone allowed him such treatment. But Rihanna Seska calmly informed that Mr. Dimitri previous had simply come at the invitation of the Queen Dowager. And then the guy threw an inkwell at Rihanna's feet and yelled that apparently nothing connects him to Rihanna except the Queen Dowager. And then, shaking from such disrespect, Rihanna wondered how Igor could even say such a thing. Then she slowly began to lose consciousness and fell to the floor, and the last thing she heard was Igor's frightened scream. Ended up with the guy laying on the bed. The main character was constantly nearby and gently held her hand, and so immediately noticed when Rihanna Seska came to her senses and excitedly asked how she was feeling. But Rihanna Seska didn't understand why he was holding her hand all this time, informed her that she seemed to be very overworked and apologized for appearing like that in front of the king. But Igor still tearfully reported that he was very happy that Rihanna Seska was awake, and he had no idea how hard it was for the girl, for he knew nothing at all about it. So he hugged her and apologized for what he'd done and promised he'd protect her and their baby. Then told them that a doctor had just come to see them and said that Rihanna Seska was pregnant, and she fainted due to anemia that developed during pregnancy. then informed her that she didn't have to worry about anything, and at that moment Rihanna Seska cried with happiness and wondered if they were finally having a baby. At this time, the disgruntled Leticia was breaking things at the Earl's manor and didn't understand why the king wasn't communicating with her, and thought about the fact that the king had danced a few dances with her at the ball, and she was very pretty, so the guy must have fallen in love with her. Then she remembered that Igor had one arm around her waist, and she also remembered his gaze, and wondered if that look was really piercing, and Leticia could literally feel Igor's breath on her. But at the same time, as soon as Rihanna Seska left, the king immediately followed her, and Leticia grudgingly didn't understand how he could do that to her and go after Rihanna. And then I thought she just wouldn't stand for it. At this time, the noblewomen were discussing rumors about the red-haired girl with whom the king had danced at the ball, and realized that it was the queen's sister, but not her own, for she was the earl's illegitimate child. And he brought her into the house just after the countess's death. And then one of the girls asked if that girl wanted to be the king's bride while being the mistress's child. But the other lady said that Leticia had acted as if everything had been decided and had done so in front of the queen, and apparently had no shame. And then the aristocrats realized that the queen dowager had taken custody of Rihanna's sister, Cheska, since Queen Consort was too soft with her half-sister, and realized that Leticia was only behaving this way because the Queen Dowager allowed her to, and could not understand such nightmarish behavior, but realized the reason why Count Allison and his family often appear at the palace. At this time, Igor, who was reading a book, heard the conversation of the aristocrats and realized that the rumors spread very quickly, but his aide calmly informed him that such rumors could ruin the Queen Dowager's plan, and it would make her even angrier. But Igor remarked that he didn't want it to be discussed during the tea party, since the problem with the hair had already been solved, so it was better for the rumors to subside. But I remembered that during the dance Leticia had said that she had long admired Igor, and admitted that Rihanna Seska shouldn't have become queen. But even so, they still ended up together. And then the disgruntled king realized that everything was going very wrong, and the aide watching him thought that Rihanna Seska's pregnancy had ruined the king's mother's plan. But he still wasn't happy about it. At the time, Rihanna Seska was writing a letter to Dimitri saying that when he heard from her, he would already know she was pregnant, and she's finally having a baby, and although their meeting was brief, it must have brought her good luck, and earlier Dimitri previous was worried about her marriage, but now she's fine. And the aristocrats treated her better after the news. And also lately Rihanna's body has turned out to be heavy, so she only reads and also sews clothes for the baby. And it seemed to be the happiest time since she became a member of the royal family. And she couldn't wait for her baby to be born and to call Dimitri her uncle. After that, she said goodbye. But at the end, she wrote that she had established a relationship with the king, and they were doing great. And therefore, Rihanna Seska believed that the future would be even better. So she asked Dimitri previous not to worry too much about her. Ended up leaning against his stomach. A little later, Igor was trying to figure out who they were having, a girl or a boy. But afterward, Dimitri previous stated that he didn't really care, as regardless of Paul's baby, the child would be his. But Rihanna Seska did not understand the meaning of these words. So she asked the king about it, who said with a smile that it was not important now, because the girl would understand what he meant when the time came. And kissing her forehead informed her that he was busier than usual right now, but promised to come by more often so the girl wouldn't worry. At this time at the count's estate, a disgruntled Leticia was pondering that her stupid sister was pregnant, and that's why the king hadn't come to see her, and thought that the king just couldn't do that to her, and it was stupid. But an agitated Count Allison tried to calm her down, telling her that everything would change when the baby was born and a king would be hers. But displeased Leticia said that perhaps the king would change his attitude towards her, but did not understand how the man could leave her. But Count Allison explained that there was no need to worry about it now, since the Queen Dowager had told them to wait and showed the letter as proof. At which time the queen, turning to her maid, inquired if she had brought what she demanded, and make sure no one saw her on her way here. Then she opened the letter, and after reading it with a smile, she noted that all the preparations were almost finished. And the maid reported that Count Allison had asked for an answer and was interested in what to say to him. And Lady Leticia appeared very upset. But the queen stated that Leticia was much more intelligent than her sister, and so they could allow her to visit the palace, and it had to be done as soon as possible. But the woman said that if the queen was afraid of making a mistake, they could find another lady. But she calmly stated that it was almost done, and they needed to heat things up a bit. At that time, Igor was on the hunt and rode his horse after his prey, then drew his crossbow and immobilized his target with one precise shot. And then looking over the prey, the assistant noticed that the beast was really huge. But Igor calmly explained that it was the largest representative of the pack, and he had long been following their movements to catch them. And the aide only marveled that the king was able to do it even in the dark. But he explained that he had traveled a long way deep into the forest, so it couldn't have been otherwise. But at that moment, the assistant realized that the king could not have come here just for the wolf, because they were in the Black Forest. And the forest was called that because of the tall trees that let in no light at all. This forest was in the northern part of the country, and if you cross the river that flows through Calcite, you can get to the Empire of Toulouse, and this forest is a secret passage for spies and brigands. And then pondering, Igor realized that they hadn't gone too far yet. But someone was clearly negotiating with his mother, and perhaps something had been secretly sent to Kraton. And the aide stated that the Queen Dowager was definitely behind it, but her purpose was still unclear. But after Rihanna Seska got pregnant, the Earl's family quieted down, and Igor realized that this lull was short-lived, and so they needed to find out what the Queen Dowager was up to. Then stated that they had to get back soon as it would be dark soon, but it would take a lot of strength to carry this wolf. Whereupon Igor told Basil that he, as king, would be the bait, for there was nothing left to do but expose himself to danger. But shocked Basil couldn't understand how the king could even become a decoy, but he explained that that was the reason. For now, they were to learn what seemed sweet to everyone around them, but was really poison. But Basil stated that the Counts Clovis and Allison had a secret meeting and were discussing something, and after thinking about it, Igor said that in that case, he would just use Leticia, and asked that the lad deal with the wolf and bring him to the palace, and that it was punishment for Basil being so late in reporting to him about the Count's meeting. As a result, at this time in the kingdom's capital, everyone around was discussing the news that the epidemic had reached the royal family of Kraton, and many died, including the crown prince, and all members of the royal family who were at the temple service died of an unknown disease. And not only the crown prince died, but those in line to the throne. At that time in the royal conference room, everyone was discussing the tragedy that had happened in Kraton, because the Queen Dowager's blood relatives were there, and a delegation should be sent there as soon as possible to express their condolences. And then a disgruntled Igor thought about the fact that in all likelihood he was going to be sent to the courtyard where the epidemic was raging. But the aristocrats said that although they were sorry that a neighboring country had gone through such a thing, they could not thoughtlessly send their men there, for the disease could be passed on to them. Then watching the quarreling aristocrats, the king and Basil thought that it was very strange indeed, for if the Queen Dowager was involved, then those who were close to her would be in trouble. And Igor wondered if almost all of Kraton's royal family were dead, and that meant the only heir would be the Queen Dowager. At this moment, a weeping queen entered the room with tears in her eyes, declaring that all her cousins were dead. And the prince came running up to her and asked her not to worry so much. She only said that she could not worry, because there was a horror in her homeland, and even the heavens didn't care because innocent souls had died. But the next moment, Igor asked the woman to calm down and come to her senses. But at that moment, she fainted, and then the agitated fellow called his assistant to fetch the royal physician, after which an agitated Igor held his mother, not realizing what he was supposed to do. Eventually, everyone gathered in the Queen Dowager's chambers while she was unconscious, and the maid reported that the recent events had really shocked the woman. But the protagonist exhaled a sigh of relief and thought that, fortunately, all her cousins were safe, and the surprised maid wondered if even Mr. Dimitri had not fallen ill. But Rihanna calmly informed that only direct heirs could go to the temple, and so he escaped illness. And the maid said that she was really glad to hear that, especially since her position was to keep calm, and said that she would take care of the Queen Dowager, since Rihanna had to go back to her chambers. Then the doctor said that he would do everything necessary so the main character could really rest. And then on her way out, she asked that everyone take care of the Queen Dowager and call her when she woke up. But in the end, once everyone was out, the queen was not happy and said she was annoyed. And the maid only remarked that Rihanna's relatives were not in the temple. But the queen was not pleased to notice that she was the only one left of the heirs, and it was really unexpected. And then the maid asked what the Queen Dowager would do if Dimitri was chosen as king of Kraton. But she said she obviously didn't want it, and she'd have to fight for her rights. Then she demanded that the maid prepare what she had previously requested, and she bowed and followed her order. At this moment, Basil stood outside the door and didn't understand what he had just heard, for the Queen Dowager was clearly behind it all, and he came with white roses as a token of sympathy from the council. But now he had found out the truth, and so he went at once to the king, realizing that it was evidently connected with the case he was trying to scout. Eventually, at that time, Leticia went to the man that she was expecting, and then he welcomed the girl with open arms and told her that he just couldn't do otherwise that time. But Leticia calmly reported that she realized he was doing the best thing for the country, and asked if the guy would make her his queen. Eventually, 2 months after the outbreak of the plague, the Council of Kraton organized an emergency meeting, and Dimitri's coronation was held and the kingdom regained stability. And then reflecting on it, Basil said that compared to his father, Dimitri seemed like a likable man, and his diplomatic work was appreciated, especially in last mission to their country. And Basil said that it was good because the king's relative had also become king, and so there would be additional support, especially since he was a young and single ruler soon to have a wife and children. But disgruntled Igor, throwing the papers at his assistant, informed him that he needed to stop talking nonsense and go deal with the papers. He said that he had to visit the queen, but the aide excitedly remarked that it would be strange if the king went empty-handed. Rihanna ended up quietly reading a book and looking at the golden feather that Igor had given her a long time ago. And at that moment, he entered the room and kissed the protagonist and asked what she was doing and apologized for interrupting her reading. But she calmly stated that she was looking for something in the book. They then showed him the pen and asked if Igor remembered it. And then he remembered their childhood and the fact that this feather had appeared during their first meeting. And with a smile, I looked back at my spouse and asked if she made a wish then. But she calmly reported that the miracle has already really come true. And then Igor said that if his queen wasn't greedy, he'd like it to go to their child. But the next moment, Basil burst into the room to announce that the king and queen had received letters of congratulations and gifts from the royal family of Kraton. And these were fine jewelry, headdresses, and clothing made of Kraton's finest materials, as well as toys for the baby. Then looking at the servant girls who were bringing the gifts, she said that they were the rarest treasures from the Northern Islands. Then reported that there was also animal fresh fruit from the Southern Islands. Basil said happily that he hadn't even expected such a large number of gifts, and that they really could fill the entire palace. And handing the box to the queen, said that it was a gift from King Kraton, and he asked that the girl open the box without witnesses. And the king said that the girl would understand everything, and he repeated several times that Rihanna had to open it alone. Whereupon the aide looked at the king in all seriousness and informed him that they urgently needed to go to his office, as Count Clovis had passed away. And then a worried Igor realized that he was also dead, and now he didn't know what to do, but he realized that he shouldn't let it show. And so he smilingly approached Rihanna and said that he would not be able to come to her often because there were a lot of things he had to deal with, and asked if his wife could wait for him. And she only wished him luck with a smile and asked him to come back as soon as possible. In the end, as they walked down the corridor, the disgruntled king pondered that apparently after Kraton, it was their country that would be next in line, and at such a critical time when the queen was pregnant. But a worried Basil said that it was too early to tell if they were going to have an epidemic, since no one in the Earl's entourage was showing symptoms of the disease. And also Lady Leticia was with the Earl before his death, and she is perfectly well. But the displeased king inquired what it meant. Then Basil said he didn't know the details, but it was likely they had a secret meeting. And then the king thought about the fact that the Queen Dowager had previously tried to set Leticia up with him, and when that failed, his mother had created a foul rumor, but he was relieved. But awkwardly, the assistant said that if the count became king, Leticia could become queen, but noted that such talk they needed to cover other rumors, because if suddenly the rumors about the epidemic became true, it would be a real nightmare. But on opening the door, the king noticed that Leticia was standing behind them, and so wondered what she was doing here, and then excitedly realized that I think he was right. Shortly before that, Leticia was handed a box saying it was from the Queen Dowager and contained a poison created in the Empire of Tolos. And one drop was enough to make a man vomit blood and die. And if you add wine or any other drink, the poison will not be noticed at all, because it had no color or smell, and the poison just slowly penetrated the body and then killed the person, as if the man had died of some contagious disease. And Leticia was told to use the poison when the time came to find her place in life. And presently, Leticia ran up to the king with a smile, and hugging him told him that she had always known he would come back to her. And at this point, the disgruntled boy was thinking that even though it was his own fault, he felt like he had been slathered with dirt, and couldn't believe he had to do this to get rid of his mother, and wondered what his wife was doing right now, while the protagonist, left alone, was opening the box because she was supposed to do it when she was alone. Inside, she noticed it was a ship, and remembered that when Dimitri was 9 years old, he had shown her this ship and told her that it was a sailing ship, and told her that such ships could easily melt any sea, and promised Rihanna that someday he'd go on a sailing ship and sail around the world. And an overjoyed Rihanna stated that in that case, she wanted to sail with her brother, but he noticed that the girl was too small and needed to grow up. And then they looked at the ship together and dreamed of their future. And then looking at the little thing, and Rihanna reflected that although they had both grown up, Dimitri had fulfilled their dreams. But then she remembered that she had a magic quill, and she also remembered that Igor had said at the banquet that they needed to develop sea trade routes. And putting the first one in the secret compartment, she thought that if the sailboat that fulfills dreams came to her husband, perhaps his dream would also come true. At which time the king, with all seriousness, looked at Leticia and told Basil not to let anyone in here and to put some guards. After which the intimidating-looking Leticia informed him that they clearly had something to discuss and informed him that she had committed an outrageous act. And she not only spread rumors that she was gonna be his wife, but she lied about sleeping together a few times. But it never happened, and wondered if she wanted to be queen so badly, but suggested that maybe someone told her to do it, and thought to himself that he didn't mean to act rudely, but it was better to do so than to torture this girl, and demanded that she answer his questions. At this time, the agitated aide-ran realized that he had to cover the exits urgently and needed to contact the captain of the guard first. At that time, a maid came to the queen and told her that Leticia was now in the king's study. But the queen only thought that she had to fulfill her promise, because although she felt sorry for her son, she had to somehow reward the girl for the murder of the count. But a surprised maid inquired for what reason the queen had asked Leticia specifically to deal with this count. But she calmly explained that her father had lost a large sum of money to the count a long time ago, and she had no other choice. But the maid thought that it was really dangerous to associate such a girl with the king, and the queen agreed, but said that it was Leticia who got rid of her worst enemy, and therefore Leticia was much better than Rihanna, because the queen understood perfectly well what moves this girl. But while the king held Leticia, he wondered if she was smiling and looked as if she had gone mad, and throwing her down on the bed, grudgingly inquired who Leticia thought he was in the first place, and again ordered her to answer honestly and asked who he was to her. And then the girl said what he was to her, but Leticia calmly said that Igor was her king. And then the lad concealed his displeasure by informing her that Leticia understood perfectly well what she had now to say to him. And the girl, enchanted by the king, confessed that now she would tell everything. And so the king asked why she had tried to kill the earl and succeeded, but the girl calmly said she had done it because of the king, and said that she knew the dad really loved her, so it made no sense for him to stay together with Rihanna. But at that moment, there was a noise of the door opening, and the agitated king demanded that the aide let no one out. But in the next moment, she saw that now it was not the assistant who entered his office, but his wife, who even dropped her present out of shock. Leticia only smiled and wondered if her sister had come to stop them. But the disgruntled king shouted at her not to lie, and then Rihanna couldn't stand it and ran away. And the king, breaking out of Leticia's grip, was about to follow his concert, thinking that he needed to clear up this misunderstanding as soon as possible. After all, they were just starting to have a good relationship. And the girl, running away from him in tears, wondered why she was running now, and why the king was with her sister. Whereupon she remembered how long ago her mother had tearfully begged the count not to leave her. Also remembered her acquaintance with Leticia, when she was brought by the count the day after the funeral, and how that same girl was constantly mocking her, for she did not consider her her elder sister, for she was always crying like a fool, as well as Igor, who suggested she wonder if she was fit to be queen. But at that moment, Rihanna stopped in front of a bright window, and ahead of her was a staircase leading down to where she was going to run. And then with tears in her eyes looking back, the girl did not understand why she was running so long. Rihanna didn't know whether her body was heavier or her heart. She didn't feel responsible for her decision, and once Rihanna reached the light, life stopped putting pressure on her. And then the girl realized that maybe she just didn't want to fight anymore. And it was only when Rihanna stopped that she realized how dark her life was and decided that she didn't want to run anymore. And eventually she fell down the stairs, and all Igor could do was just scream desperately to stop her. But she ended up falling down the stairs and lying there like she was dead.